We're going to be talking about some poetry, which I acknowledge up front is not everybody's favorite subject in the world, but part of my objective in this class is to get you guys to understand at least a couple of things, if you don't already. First of all, that poetry is not some strange creature invented to torture people who are not inclined towards literature, and that number two, it's not that complicated. Poetry is simply a form of artistic expression, and like all forms of art, what it is fundamentally about is truth. What does that mean? Well, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but basically when we talk about truth in art, we're talking about trying to articulate or express in some form that which is true for all of us, or at least the vast majority of us as human beings. Things, ideas, concepts, experiences that we can all relate to. And so I like to start with a few different poems that I feel like touch upon very common human themes. And I don't like to start with a lot of jargon, by which I mean all these special terms that we're going to be learning, like prosody and stanzas and enjambments and etc., because I feel like that confuses the issue. I like to start a little broad. I think that it's best when you're learning to appreciate something for the first time to simply try to see the beauty within it, what its essence is. And as I say, I think the essence of poetry is merely truth. So the first poem we're going to look at is called The Lake Isle of Innisfree, and it's by William Butler Yeats, who was a great Irish poet of about a century ago. One of the things about poetry that's important to remember is that it started out as an oral tradition. So that means it predates writing. And all oral traditions have an aural, which is to say sound, component to them. And I think that it is still a good idea and highly recommended that whenever you're dealing with a poem for the first time, you should read it out loud, which is exactly what I'm going to do now. And it's also maybe a good idea to hear somebody else read it. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in a bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core. This poem is about an imaginary place that is better than the real place in which one happens to find oneself at a particular time. And that is a fundamental human theme. We all dream of escape. Robert Frost, whom we'll also be reading here in a moment, once said that escape is the most universal of all themes in literature. When you think about it, most religions, when you get right down to it, are based upon a theme of escape, and they're about the ultimate escape, which is an escape from our own mortality. If you were to look at that on a psychological basis, it traces back to this need that we all have, a need to feel as though there are always options. And so Yeats in this poem created a place, Innisfree. Now Innisfree is actually an island, off the coast of Ireland, but it's pretty clear that the Innisfree he's referring to is not the real Innisfree. It's a special place where he doesn't have the troubles of his day-to-day life. He doesn't feel crowded, he doesn't feel pressured. He doesn't have to take an English 102 class, he doesn't have to have a job, you know, to pay bills and things like that. And that's a very relatable theme, and I think it's one of the reasons that poem has lasted as long as it has. The next poem we're going to look at is a poem by William Blake called The Tiger. I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of the big cats. You know, if you take me to a zoo, you can leave me where the big cats are housed, and then, you know, you can go on and you can look at the elephants and the monkeys and the snakes or whatever you want to. I'll be right there, and I'll be happy just hanging out all day. And I can remember one time I was at a zoo, and I was watching this puma, you know, and he was half asleep, acting like a lot of house cats do, just kind of lounging around. And I happened to notice this young lady was coming up with a stroller, and she was pushing a stroller with a baby inside of it, and she also had a toddler with her. And the baby started crying, so she got a little distracted from the toddler, and the toddler started to toddle away from her. Now, she wasn't looking at the puma, but I was, and one of the things I noticed is that the puma, who had been seemingly comatose, as soon as that toddler got a certain distance away from the mother, the puma went and came fully awake and alive. And it was instantly obvious what the puma was thinking. The puma was thinking, wow, that one is just my size, right? I see a snack. And it was horrifying on some level, right? I mean, and you know, I was very glad that there was a cage there and there was no way the puma could get out. And the mother never knew, right, that the puma had been sizing up her child in this way. But it also occurred to me later that that scene pointed to something William Blake captured in this poem a long time ago. And that theme is one of the paradox of beauty. A paradox is something that is seemingly contradictory but nonetheless true. You know, in football, people often say if you have two quarterbacks, you actually have none, right? That's an expression of a paradox. What could that possibly mean? How is it possible you could have two, you could have none? Well, of course, what they mean is, you know, you haven't really decided on your quarterback, and it's possible neither one of them's any good. Fans of the Chicago Bears are well aware of this problem, right? Well, the paradox here is that sometimes the most beautiful things in nature are the most frightening. We can all relate to this whenever there's a terrific thunderstorm. You know, there is something awe-inspiring and beautiful about cumulonimbus clouds building and then a horizon that has gotten incredibly dark. But it's also terrifying, and it does terrible damage, or is at least capable of doing that. Blake realized that a tiger was in some respects the perfect embodiment of that paradox. There is something awe-inspiring about a 600-pound cat, right? It was the perfect embodiment of the paradox of terrible beauty, something that is ferocious and deadly and inescapable, and yet undeniably graceful and gorgeous with those stripes, right? The way it moves, you know, so pleasing. He uses the word symmetry for the beauty. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer? What the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil? What dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the Lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? One of the things you'll notice about the poem as well is that Blake uses the idea of terrible beauty, this paradox, as a reason to question God, not in a skeptical or atheistic way, but more in a way of trying to grapple with the concept of a God who could make, as he puts it, a lamb, something that is, soft and fluffy. We might say a bunny or something like that, and also make a tiger, right? Or you could substitute in there maybe a cobra, something that is fascinating to look at and yet horrible too, right? Monstrous. What's relatable about that, right, as a theme, is that we often find as we progress through life that life is filled with these complex experiences that are paradoxical. Sometimes on our biggest days, for instance, in a few years, hopefully all of you will have a big day when you graduate from college. But you shouldn't be surprised if on that day, for some reason you can't quite understand, you feel a little sad. That's the paradox of life, right? That we often don't have unmixed emotions in our biggest moments. Our biggest moments often give us complex emotions that have contradictory elements within them. And maybe that's why we cry when we're happy. Maybe that's part of the secret there. The last poem we're going to look at is called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. It's by Robert Frost. Whose woods these are I think I know. His house is in the village though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there's some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. The relatable theme here, I believe, is the challenge of growing weary. That's actually a theme that runs through a lot of Frost's poems, a lot of his works. He had a life that was filled with some dark moments and some challenging moments, and it was something he often tried to capture in his work, that feeling that we all come to at some point in our lives when we feel like we want to give up. We just can't take it anymore. We don't have anything else to give. We've already been in fifth gear and somebody wants us to go faster, and we just don't know how we're going to do that. Or we've tried seemingly everything we know to try and nothing has worked, and you just want to throw your hands up and walk away. But of course, what happens in the poem is the speaker accepts that feeling but then rejects it. He rejects it ultimately because, as he puts it, he has promises to keep. And so the poem becomes, in a lot of respects, an affirmation of the idea that the worst thing you can ever do is walk away or give up. That cannot actually ever be an option, even though it's very truthful to admit that we all feel that way from time to time. Thanks for listening.